So below that gain, we're now into what's called the portion of the channel processing section. So that would be everything from these two filters here, which we're going to discuss in a minute, through the EQ, and then these two sections here, which are all called dynamics. Okay, so this little section here is all called channel processing. This is where everything is, where we're actually fixing, affecting, correcting, adjusting the sound and shape of each source. That's why it's called channel processing. The things is actually being processed. So start us at the top there and walk us through all of that, Scott. The high pass filter and low pass filter.
This all, the processing channel has a dedicated knob and button section on the right-hand side of the desk here. So at the top, you've got your in and out buttons for your high and low pass filters. The high pass filter is gonna cut out any frequencies above where you have it set. And the low pass filter, well, I get them reversed all the time. The high pass is gonna cut out any frequencies below where you have it set.
It functions the exact opposite of how you think it would when you say it.
And
high pass filter cuts out low information. Low pass filter cuts out high end information.
So that's, and again, you've got two dedicated knobs for that. You got to make sure you're selected on the channel you want to process before, and the channel you have selected will turn gold, indicating that it is selected. So below that, you have your EQ. It's important to note that on a default channel strip, all these are going to be turned off. So you're going to walk into a desk. If you pulled up a default channel strip, it's all going to be turned off, and you actually have to go in and turn them on for it to actually be affecting it.
Mm-hmm.
So
the good news is most all that is pretty well set because most of us are every week are building on another file. We're not starting from scratch. So you're not having to do a lot of this every week.
Correct. And then you've got your high frequency section, your high mids, your low mids, and then your low frequency section. But all of these are fully parametric, which means they're capable of going from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz.
Yeah, so there's no fixed range that the two mids only cover this certain area. You can put any one of those four in any part of the spectrum and do whatever you want to it.
So I'm affecting the low frequency band currently, but I've got it all the way up at the top, and you can move it all the way down to the bottom of your frequency spectrum.
And you'll notice the colors of these dots, of these knobs on the screen here, correlate with the color of dots on the screen. And this screen is like touch and turn. I mean, so you can like touch and drag and all that kind of jazz on the screen as well.
So with that, the top knob of the three knob section is always going to be your frequency. The middle knob on the left-hand side is going to be your gain. And then the bottom knob on the right-hand side is going to be how wide of a cue that you're actually affecting. Mm-hmm. So the further to the left you go, the wider it's going to be. The further to the right you go, the narrower it's going to be.
A cue of 1.0, by the way, is 1 octave. We talked about that earlier. An octave might be like from 40 hertz to 80 hertz, or 80 to 100, or 320 to 640. A cue of 1.0 is 1 octave. Okay? Little tidbit there.
So
you can go extremely narrow or extremely wide. Typically, we want to try to stay in the 1.0, 2.0, or smaller. We want to be cutting as little as possible, affecting as little as possible, unless we're trying to go for a specific distinct sound and want to really filter it. We want to be doing as little as possible. We don't want to get too wide. If we're having to do something wider than 2.0, there might be another problem somewhere else we want to look at and inspect and adjust.
Yep. The other cool thing about the Digico is all of these bands are able to be dynamic. So if you want, like when somebody's singing softly, like it sounds good, but as soon as they start like getting really, really loud and digging into it, they start getting piercing or like biting. You can have that adjust accordingly. Like as they get louder into the microphone, you're pulling out more versus when they're singing softer.
Let's go on and talk about compression right now, and then maybe that'll clear up the dynamic section of EQs as well. So the next section after the EQ is called dynamics. That's these two settings here and these two windows. Okay, there's a couple different options for each of them. You see here, for dynamics 1, we have a compressor, a multi-band compressor, and a de-esser. And then 3 options for dynamic 2 are a gate, a ducker, or another compressor. Okay, so talk through each of those. We don't need to discuss ducking, and let's not discuss multi-band comps right now.
All right. So compression is a way of leveling off your sound. If you got one of those singers that's singing like really softly, and then they really get in and are like singing, like belting out and singing, that can really cause you to have to do a lot of work with writing your fader while they're singing, when you might need to be adjusting another page. So the threshold is at what point the compressor is going to start to duck, enact whatever,
Whatever signals happen.
The attack is how fast it's going to start.
Let's do this. Let's go here and put that up and open the graph.
Oh,
There we
look
go.
at him. So, as you can see, the further down I move the threshold, the more it's adjusting or the more it's reducing the gain.
You can't really see it in that meter right now, but it says GR, which stands for gain reduction. So it's showing that's how much it is limiting.
Yep. The attack is how quickly it's going to affect that. Sometimes you want it to affect it slower. Other times you want it to grab and like really clamp down on something. The release is how fast it's going to, once the signal goes below the threshold, how fast it's going to release that compression. Disengage. And then you have output gain, which if you're consistently reducing something, this is going to give you an equal, more output. So again, like if you've got somebody who's singing really, really soft, you can give them some output gain, which is going to bring them up. And then as soon as they start like screaming into the microphone, it's going to bring them back. And that kind of helps you stay within a range on your signal versus sitting.
Now, with your output gain, it can get tricky quick. So I would highly encourage you to not go above 2 to 4 dB of output gain, and don't mess with it at all until you're comfortable with the compressor and understand, until you've had some time to play around with it and really understand it, because it can get hairy quick. Okay.
Yes.
Based on the dynamics of whatever source is coming in. Did you talk about ratio on that as well?
I did not.
Go ahead and do that.
So the ratio is how hard the compressor is actually going to affect your engage and how quickly. So the lighter the ratio, the less it's going to reduce gain-wise.
So at 1 to 1, there's no reduction. It's straight through, pass through. At 4 to 1, once it hits, for every 4 decibels of increase, it's only going to let through 1 decibel. However much increases, it's only going to let through 1. So for every 4 of increase, it only is going to let through 1. So that's kind of how the ratio
every
works.
8 and so on. You can go 50 to 1, which means for every 50 dB further you go, you're only going to get 1 dB more. And that's getting to more of a limiter instead of...
So basically, no matter how hard you push it, it's not going to get any louder because you don't really have 50 dB of dynamics.
The other thing you have for the compressor is the knee, or how hard, how quickly it's going to actually engage the compressor. So on the Digico, you have 3 different settings. You have hard, medium, and soft. So you can see how on soft, it's a nice little arc
Soft curve,
at the compression point. Hard, it's literally...
So that means it's going to, with a hard setting, it will let the full signal go all the way up until the point of the threshold, and then it will begin immediately enacting that full ratio. Whereas if you go down to soft, it's going to kind of graduate into that, or up into that threshold, and then begin enacting fully, but it's going to kind of ease into it a little bit more. So
That would be somewhere where you don't necessarily want to hear the compression hitting as hard as.
yeah. And in our next session with mixing, we're going to talk. We'll do some examples and make that pretty drastic and exaggerated.
Yeah.
To cover that and explain that more.
In order to select what you want the dynamic to be, he talked about you've got 3 different modes for each dynamic. We're going to skip over the multi-compressor and go to the de-esser, but there's a knob that'll light up for the row that you have selected, and that'll let you switch the
function of each dynamic setting.
Yeah.
So a de-esser is just like a kind of tailored EQ to where you set a frequency section. Maybe what's called de-esser because primarily sometimes people are very prominent in S's and you hear a lot of and it's not very pleasant. So you grab that one specific range and just kind of like notch it out hard.
You can adjust where that range is going. So if somebody's sibilance is way up there, you can get it into that 12 to 13 range. Or if it's more in the upper mid range, you can bring that down. And you can also adjust the width of how far you want that range to cover.
Yeah, so it is slightly different than a EQ in the fact that it is compressing it, not notching it out, but it's holding that one specific area back for that purpose.
And you've got the same controls with your threshold, attack, release, and ratio.
Great. Cool. Let's talk about a gate.
So the gate, which is the bottom half of that, yes, the bottom half of that graph. The gate is
It'd be a way to block out unwanted bleed from other sources, particularly used in drum kits most often.
Yeah.
Okay, so in a situation where we have 9 or 10 or 11 microphones in a very tight, compact space with a lot of loud sources, we don't want everything bleeding into all the microphones. We want to try to keep things as isolated and separate as possible. So we might enact some gates there. So, for example, the toms are the least used part of the kit most often. So we got 2 or 3 microphones based on however many toms you have. We might want to gate the toms. Show us how that would work, Scott.
So you would want to bring the threshold up until you want the signal to pass through. The threshold, again, is at what point you're, in a gate scenario, at what point you're releasing the hold on the sound. So whenever sound passes through the gate, it is allowing audio to pass.
Right, so until the audio crosses that threshold, that gate is keeping the channel off. Once the signal crosses that threshold, then it's opening it, letting it through. So for example, like I said, on the toms, if the drummer's playing the hi-hat and snare, that tom might be picking up some bleed, getting some noise, but until he hits, we have the threshold set to where it only crosses when he hits it, okay? When it's catching that bleed, it's gonna keep the audio shut off until he hits that tom, and then it's gonna open that gate up to let the audio pass through.
So as with the compressor, you've also got your attack speed, the hold speed, which is how long that gate's gonna stay open before it starts closing again, and then a release speed, which is how slowly that gate is gonna close. And then the range is how much you're gonna reduce the signal. So like, if you want it to be gated until a certain point, but you still kind of want to hear if they're like noodling a little bit, you can set the range to be lower. But if you want it to be like full on, I can't hear them, I don't want to be able to hear them, you can set it to be...
Take that range all the way down.
All the way down.
Great. So that covers kind of everything about the channel processing. And here's our theory and approach to channel processing. Here's our approach on it, okay? First and foremost, primarily, we always want to try to fix the sound at the source. We are not using our EQs and dynamics to fix sound, okay? No EQ is gonna make a bad singer sound good, gonna make a bad drum sound good, or bad guitar tone sound good. And I'm not knocking on worship, I'm just saying that's not what this is for, okay? Primarily, these are tools to correct or fix sources and how they are presented in our room through our PA system, not for fixing the problems. Whenever possible, we want to fix the thing at the source. Ideally, best case is I have a good relationship with the drummer, and I can say, hey man, that tom is kind of ringing, can you work out that tuning a little bit before I go gating and EQing and cutting out frequencies and all that kind of stuff. We want to be able to work with the source. Now, sometimes there's just not relational equity. You got a new team member, or you're new to a campus, or you're just out of time. You had a bad time setting up, you're running late, you just got to deal with it and move on. Okay, so we got to kind of know when to balance those two things. But ideally, primarily, we want to fix everything at the source. Secondarily to that, the approach is, like I said, this is here to correct problems. The mindset we want to work from is that we are here to faithfully represent and reproduce what the worship team is doing on stage, what is happening on stage. We're not creating a different sound. They're not playing rock and we're trying to make a hip hop mix. You know, we're not trying to, it's a two-way tango dance, okay? We're here to faithfully represent and reproduce what is happening on the stage, okay? People say it's like this sometimes, garbage in, garbage out, okay? I'm not knocking the worship team again, but like whatever is coming from the stage is what we are producing. If it's great, it's on to us to make a great mix. And hopefully, that should just mean very little work. The better the band and the better our system is all set up, the less work we have to do, and that's the goal. But in general, all these tools here are all tools to correct the sources, or to correct the response of our system, and to make things as pleasant as possible in whatever manner is needed.
Yeah, the goal is to make what's on stage sound louder. And so if it sounds great on stage, it should come out great louder. If it sounds bad on stage, it's probably going to come out bad louder.
Louder, that's right. Up is louder. Kind of my mantra with faders. Push it up, make it louder.